Welcome to another edition of 41 Files Podcast. We're glad to have you here with us, joining us at the 41 Action News studio and our podcast studio that we're so proud of here at 41 Action News. Joined as always by digital producer Sam Hartle. Hi, Sam.
Good morning. I think, it's about noon Wednesday, so still
Ish,
morning.
Yeah, right before. And 41 Action News reporter Sarah Plake is in the studio as well. Hi, Sarah.
Hi. I'm a little out of breath still.
Were you running around? What's going on?
Well, I ran up the steps to be in this room to talk to you lovely people.
Okay.
Because I was doing an interview just now about Mexico City. I'm like, oh, I got to get up there. So,
Okay.
yes.
Have you had any of the... Now I've got to worry about Thanksgiving and how I say it. Have you had any of the Thanksgiving food downstairs yet?
I have not, but I am planning to partake, even though I didn't bring anything.
That's
but
fine. That's fine. You don't have to bring food to
I
have
made
food.
a 5-pound acorn squash last night
Did you? I'm so excited to eat it.
with brown sugar and slivered or sliced almonds on the
Oh
sliver.
my gosh,
Yeah.
that sounds so good.
No butter, so it's like helpful,
It's fine.
somewhat healthy. But
It's fine.
Butter. So Sarah is in studio today to talk about marijuana, which has
That's
been a
right.
topic of our conversation quite a bit over the last couple of podcasts we've done,
yeah.
but now for a different reason, or slightly different, because it was medical marijuana is what we talked about last week after Election Day, Missouri voters passing that pretty strongly on Election Day. This time around, it's because of the legal aspect of what's to come with that, and kind of a surprising announcement this week from Jackson County Prosecutor
But
Gene
is
Peters
it-
Baker. I was going to say, is
it
it surprising? Jackson County Prosecutor Gene Peters Baker comes out with new rules, new guidelines, so to speak, on how her office will be prosecuting marijuana cases in the future. Sarah, give us an update on exactly what this announcement was yesterday.
Yeah, well, she said, this basically came after we legalized medical marijuana. So she said that her office is no longer going to prosecute cases of marijuana possession, with some exceptions. So I'm just going to go through the exceptions. So obviously, if you're riding around, you've got a ton of marijuana in your car, and you've got the little distribution baggies, and you've got a ton of cash and guns.
And you're clearly selling it.
Right,
Yeah.
exactly. That alludes to that's one example she used in her news release. But if you're clearly distributing, selling without proper authorization, then they're going to prosecute.
Okay.
Also, if it shows that marijuana possession is harming a child,
Okay.
they'll prosecute. And also if they find that you are driving while impaired.
Impaired, right.
Yes, which that is a whole other conversation in and of itself. So, but yeah, she said that she's no longer doing it. And so, of course, when you hear that, a lot of people are going to be like, yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah,
But, you have to be in a very specific circumstance to actually not get prosecuted.
I was going to say, so the pretty clear thread from all three of those things that she lists is you're harming other people.
Right, exactly.
It's not about necessarily you. You are out there either with the intent or you have harmed other people in those three situations. So the clear and obvious question from this becomes, okay, so if I have pot and I'm smoking in my living room and I get caught, what's next? Is that saying I'm not going to get prosecuted? What does this look like? It's different from a press release versus what this will look like in action. In action, what does this look like? What does this new guideline look like?
Well, you can still be prosecuted just because you get pulled over or whatever, and they find marijuana on you. It could go to municipal court. It could go through the city could prosecute it because very few marijuana cases even actually go to Baker's office. You have to think Baker's in charge of the whole county. We've still got a whole city with our own ordinances. Also, within Jackson County, you've got a handful of other cities with their own ordinances. People want to point out, okay, well, Kansas City decriminalized it. Okay, we did, but those other cities like Independence, Grandview, whatever, they didn't. Yeah. So if you got pulled over by a Kansas City police officer, as it stands now, if you have 35 grams or less, it's just based kind of like a slap on the wrist. If you've got more than that, even though it's decriminalized, it's going to go to Baker's office. So you would have to be in a very particular situation, like a highway patrol trooper pulls you over.
Right.
That they go to the county, they answer to the county. So maybe in that case, depending on how much you have on you, you wouldn't get prosecuted. But I talked to an attorney yesterday who already deals with a fair amount of marijuana possession cases anyway. He said that, you ain't off the hook. So, yeah.
What's the impact for people who have already been charged or are going through the criminal justice system in the cases that would now not be prosecuted?
Well, it's already going. So,
Already done. Yeah,
it's already
there's no
going.
impact to it. It's
Yeah.
not coming back to, on that kind of situation. So they're stuck basically.
I think so. I think that's the way I understand it. Yeah.
So I guess and you kind of touched on this a little bit with your last answer, but how big a deal is this then? I mean, if it's a situation where, because obviously it felt like, whoa, no more marijuana prosecute. Okay, wow. But is this really going to create that much of a change necessarily from where we are right now, would you say?
I don't foresee it being a huge impact. Like I said, very few cases even go to her office anyway. So Kansas City police officers, I talked to KCPD yesterday. They said this doesn't change anything that we do. And I talked to one of the police officers. He's like, yeah, we generally forward them to city, not county. So, but going back to your question, I don't think that this is like trailblazing or anything because I'm sure there are a handful of other prosecutors of counties who have done the same thing. Like St. Louis, they did it recently. They announced that they weren't going to prosecute. I think that this means that there's a shift in Kansas City that we're seeing. Yeah, maybe Baker's announcement wasn't, huge and groundbreaking or anything, but I think that, we're seeing a shift, we're seeing a change, and we're right in the middle of it.
Yeah.
We talked
just starting.
Yeah, we talked a little bit about this in the podcast last Friday with the spokesperson for A New Approach Missouri, which is the organization that spearheaded
Amendment 2.
Amendment 2. And they made the point that of all of the candidates, of all of the questions on last Tuesday's election, Amendment 2 had the highest level of support.
Yeah.
And I think Jean Peters Baker referenced that in her release yesterday. And so while it may not be trailblazing in the grand scheme of things, especially in the country, Missouri was 31st state to do medical marijuana. We are in the Midwest. And I think a lot of people, thought that this day might come, but
it's at least a trickle down kind of effect. It's like, okay, well, if this, then that kind of thing.
Right. And it's also interesting, to me, it also puts a little bit of the onus on Kansas. Now, Kansas, as we talked about in the pod again last week, has a different process for doing what Missouri did in terms of, votes and stuff like that. But, half of a significant portion of Kansas lives in the Kansas City metro. And it would be weird to have this kind of split the state line a little bit.
Yeah. Well, and the other thing that she mentioned, too, as well in that release yesterday, off what you were just saying there, Sam, about voters, was she referenced juries.
Yes.
We're seeing this a lot in our juries now. That's the kind of tone of how they're responding to these anyway. I thought that was telling from her release yesterday.
I think so, too. It shows that there's a changing attitude. I talked to a guy yesterday who has been, who beat cancer, and cannabis was a big part, he says, of what made him feel better. And he said, attitudes are changing. The stigma, I think, is being, he said, is being lifted.
Yeah.
And I feel that way, too. I feel like you said, juries, people have generally a kind of a more loose, lax opinion about marijuana now than maybe they did before.
I think you're probably right. So obviously, that's it will bear watching, if nothing else, just to see one, if it is a bigger drop in the bucket than we think it's going to be, or if it really is just kind of this makes sense, folded into everything else that's going on. So that's the future of what's going on with that particular question. But definitely one that got a lot of attention yesterday from Jean Peters Baker.
Absolutely.
And her office. Sarah, thanks so much for joining us. We appreciate it.
You're welcome. I'm glad to be here.
Where the field got trashed. Sporting Kansas City's had to resod in the middle of a season. This isn't that uncommon. What's a little bit uncommon here is two things. One, you had a lot of rain in Mexico City, which kept the field from the repairs they were trying to do from taking hold. And somebody needed to understand that was going to happen because they've had a few weeks here, and I don't know if they've had other events on the field, but they've had a few weeks. If they were going to resod, they needed to do it at least 3 weeks ago because it takes at least 3 weeks for that sod to really take hold. And so, with the field the way it is, it's unsafe to play on. If they try to throw some sod down this week when it doesn't have time to take hold, again, it's unsafe to play on. And really, I think the defining factor here was the NFL Players Association, after some players went to them and said, hey, man, we don't feel comfortable with this. The Players Association really came out because I think the NFL was pretty intent on keeping the game in Mexico City if possible. Obviously, this is part of their global marketing strategy. They've got 2 games in London every year now. Yeah. They're planning games in, another game in Japan. This is not the first time time they've played a game in Mexico City. There's been some preseason games and other things like that. They're trying to break into these other markets. But the Players Association flexed its muscle here a little bit, which is unique because they are far and away the weakest of the professional sports collective bargaining outfits. So I think really it came down to the players threatening to revolt.
I think you have to factor in also the level of competition going into this particular game. We heard from Schwartz, the offensive lineman, this morning, and there was one little part of his soundbite where he talked about the number of good players in this particular game coming up. I mean, and I don't want to suggest this would have been totally different if it was the Browns versus the Giants, that kind of thing, the two bottom of the league teams that aren't doing anything. I don't want to suggest that, but I think the fact that it is the two best teams in the league. Everyone's saying this could be a Super Bowl matchup, that kind of thing. Some of the biggest stars in the league are coming into this game. We cannot let them get hurt because of field conditions that had to have been a factor in what the league was discussing, right?
Well, I would assume so. I mean, especially, the Rams just lost Cooper Kupp, one of their wide receivers, to a torn ACL on a good field last week. If Todd Gurley, who had a couple knee injuries when he was in college at Georgia and is in the running for MVP right up there with Patrick Mahomes and Drew Brees, if one of those guys gets hurt because the turf slipped out from under them, the NFL's got an even bigger PR nightmare on their hands there about, why they took that chance and, the continuing, when you've got the background of the concussions and everything else, and the NFL's in action for decades about that, the NFL is not in a position right now where they can be seen as being casual or not caring about player safety. But I still think that the difference was if the players hadn't spoken up and said, hey, some of us may not play, I'm still not sure that the NFL would have made the decision yesterday. I think they might have dragged it out.
I still think it's strange that we only started hearing about this on Monday.
I agree.
No, the thing is we didn't, though. I mean, it was out there over the weekend. Somebody had tweeted some pictures
but even
of
the weekend, that still seems...
That's a week out from the game.
Right. That just seems... It seems
well, but I think a lot
right.
of people's focus didn't turn to that until some overhead shots of the field appeared last week on social media.
And looked pretty crappy. I mean, it looked bad.
Yeah, and I mean, I just don't think people had really thought about, hey, I wonder if the field down there is okay. Right. 2-3 weeks ago. So.
Well, and so obviously now the game goes back to Los Angeles because it was already going to be a home game for the Rams. So now it's still a home game.
Yeah, technically they were the home team. So they only had 7 home games this year because they gave up a home game. If you remember several years ago, the Chiefs did the same thing with one of the London games. They gave up a home game. They only had 7 games at Arrowhead that year during the regular season. In that case, they were hoping to lure a Super Bowl. It's a requirement from the league that you give up a home game in one of the international contests to host a Super Bowl, which is why Stan Kroenke, who moved the team from St. Louis to Los Angeles, wanted to do this because when he gets his new palace built, he, of course, wants the Super Bowl to come there. So to do that, they had to give up a game. So, obviously, because they were the home team, it made sense to move them back to the Coliseum.
Still a couple of seasons away on the Rams getting their full their own stadium right now. They're playing at the Coliseum now and sharing that with a college field. What's interesting to me, I read yesterday morning talking about the rules with those international games that the home team, the designated home team, is required to keep their home stadium, their actual home stadium, open in case something like this happens. So I read this yesterday where, because like you were saying, this is happening pretty regularly now that we're having 2 or 3 games a year internationally. The designated home team is required to keep their actual home stadium, whether it be Jacksonville or Los Angeles or Kansas City, whatever it is. They got to keep their actual field open that week in case something like this happens. So now they go back, and it is a home game for the Rams. But we were talking about this morning that California has its own issues right now with hosting a football game because of the fires. It's only about 40 miles away from where they're fighting some of these massive, deadly wildfires. And we're talking about that smoke could be an issue now for this game.
Well, and smoke was an issue for the Monday night game when the Giants played at San Francisco. I mean, I remember during the broadcast they were talking about the air quality index being at 161. It was in the unhealthy range. That is not going to stop the NFL from playing this game. The stadium would literally have to be on fire, and even then, I'm not sure that the NFL would halt the game. They just might make people leave the stadium. But look, I mean, anybody who's complaining about the decision to take it to Los Angeles doesn't understand how the schedule worked in the first place. I mean, I've heard a lot of carping from mostly Chiefs fans about how, it should be at a neutral site or something like that. Well, that just doesn't make any sense.
Right.
But one of the cool things that is happening, because it's moving back to Los Angeles, and that's a stadium that can hold 100,000 people, and trying to sell 100,000 tickets in 5 days is going to be difficult.
Sure.
The Chiefs and the Rams have gotten together, and they are offering tickets to emergency responders and families of emergency responders
dealing with those fires.
who are fighting these fires. And I would imagine, I haven't heard anything specifically, but obviously there was also the Thousand Oaks mass shooting. I would imagine there's going to be some recognition of that's rolled up into this. So the NFL's trying to get a little positive spin out of it. Look, I don't think this is the worst thing in the world. I mean, I think this is actually a better, truer test for the Chiefs. Hopefully nobody will get hurt because of the field. And if you're looking at this as a possible Super Bowl preview, I think the Chiefs can benefit from having to go on the road into it may not be a true road environment given some of the circumstances. But look, I mean, LA Rams fans are getting the first crack at buying tickets. So I think it's definitely going to be a partisan crowd, pro-Rams crowd. And if you look at the betting line, it's already kind of moved toward the Rams a little bit more. They were already the favorites, but they're even more of a slight favorite now that the game's moved back to L.A. And I think that's good for the Chiefs, especially because they've got some wiggle room in the race for home field advantage because the Patriots lost last week. So if they lose this one, it's not the end of the world. So all in all, I mean, I think it's good for the Chiefs because the big thing is you don't want to have a Kareem Hunt or a Tyreek Hill or a Patrick Mahomes tear an ACL trying to run around on a crappy field because that'd tank your season in a hurry.
What's the 4th and 1 Friday edition, the 4th and short? What's the rundown looking like so far?
Well, I mean, look, we're going to talk about first of all, how do the Chiefs stop this Rams offense?
The Rams have a guy, Todd Gurley.
Todd Gurley, he's okay. I don't know if you play fantasy football, but he was a fairly high pick in the fantasy world. And Jared Goff's been playing very well. There's a lot of talk. A lot of the talk leading up to this game is going to be Andy Reid versus Sean McVay because they're widely considered the two genius offensive minds in the NFL. And here's an interesting note, and we'll talk about this more on the podcast on Friday. Be sure to download it Friday afternoon.
Subscribe.
Yeah, that's right. But the over-under for total points for this game is 63.5. Which is an NFL record. Vegas and the bettors are showing no confidence in either one of these defenses, which makes sense, though, because the Rams have not been very good against the pass since Aqib Talib went down. Marcus Peters has been getting shredded. Go look for his interview from a couple weeks ago against the Saints.
You think he has something to prove this week?
Oh,
he'll be fired up.
But I mean, I think he would be anyway. I actually think that it can help the Chiefs because I think Marcus is a guy who likes to gamble. Marcus is a guy who likes to take chances in coverage. He's not what we would call sound from a discipline standpoint against the run or the pass. I think Andy and company understand that. I think he's going to be even more amped up for this one to try to prove a point to get a couple picks. So I think that with a couple well-timed pump fakes, with a couple opportunities to manipulate safeties with his eyes and stuff like that, Patrick Mahomes is going to have some chances to fire roast Marcus Peters. Now, having said that, if his ball placement isn't great, Marcus Peters might get him too. He's going to want to. But even beyond that, I mean, look, they've struggled in that aspect. Well, they also gave up 270-plus yards rushing to the Seahawks last week. This is not a dominant Rams defense like we saw early in the season. And so I think, I hate to say it, but I would probably take the over even on that 63.5 here.
That's a lot of points that to be scored on Monday night. Again, that's coming up Monday night. Chiefs versus Rams. Their 1 losses on the season. The Chiefs, of course, to the Patriots in Foxborough, and the Rams to the Saints in New Orleans. I believe that game was in New Orleans whenever they lost to the Saints as well. So they both have 1 road loss against very good teams. So it'll be really great to see and watch them square off against each other coming up on Monday night. And as Todd has said, I think 17 times so far during this interview, if you're not a 4th and 1 subscriber, please go and be that right now. They do great content on the Chiefs. If you're a Chiefs fan, you need to be listening to 4th and 1 every week. Todd, thanks so much.
Yeah, not a problem, Taylor.
Welcome back to the 41 Files podcast from 41 Action News. Glad you're with us today. And our next segment today is talking with 41 Action News reporter Kat Reed, who joins us by phone to talk about a topic that has garnered quite a bit of attention in the last couple of weeks. We've talked about it at least twice on 41 Action News newscasts, and that's Kat Reed. Hi, Kat.
Hello. How are you?
Good, thank you. Enjoying our cold weather, I hope?
Well, I can't really breathe through my nose right now, so not loving it.
What you need is some hot soup, which brings me to our topic today, because we're talking about Free Hot Soup Kansas City, the collective, as you were telling me they're referred to. And this is an organization that is trying to feed the hungry, feed people in need in really any time, but especially in times like this when it's super cold outside and people need all the help they can get, but have run into some issues with permits and what they're allowed to do. They've been on the newscast for 41 Action News a couple of times now. Kat, bring us up to speed on what's going on with this group after they've been tangling with the health department.
Yes. So just as a quick recap, it was a week from last Sunday where the health department came to the scheduled picnics, which are at various parks on Sundays at 2:00. And the health department came and told them that they needed a permit, and then they poured bleach on the food, the home-cooked food that was brought. The health department argued it was a health safety risk because they didn't know where the food was cooked, if it was kept at the right temperature, all of that, and that's why they poured bleach on the food. And then after that, there's been this ongoing debate of what is free hot soup? Is it something that needs to have a permit or not? And, we were kind of interested to see what happened to this past Sunday, if the health department would come out again, because they went ahead with their scheduled picnics, and the health department did not come out, did not put bleach on any of the food. But Free Hot Soup made a couple of changes this past weekend. They handed out a lot of prepackaged food at Ellis Davis Park downtown. And that was the gathering that I was at. No police were there, no one from the health department. And so a lot of people thought, hey, maybe this is kind of subsiding and we're just going to let this go. But that does not appear to be the case, because the health department yesterday posted a document that says illegal free hot soup operation, frequently asked questions. And it's on, the homepage for the health department, and they really double down on saying this is why they need a permit, and we didn't issue court summons or tickets or anything this last time, but if they continue to do this, we will pursue legal action.
Kat, I've been monitoring the social media conversation from 41 Action News, especially on Twitter, since the story broke. And I tell you, if there was a poll of the public's perception of the health department, it would probably be the same level of support that people give Congress or used car salesmen.
It's not strong.
It's not strong. And I know that the mayor, kind of took to social media last week to defend the health department. Other city officials have kind of defended the health department. Is there a way that the health department eventually, kind of comes out ahead on this one in terms of the perception battle?
I have to be honest, I don't think there is a way, unless, for some reason, a bunch of people got sick after eating the food. I just don't see a way where they come out on top in this situation. For instance, this past weekend, I guess one of the people who is part of the social media group has access to a press, and they made all of these T-shirts and things, and one of the T-shirts had the outline of Dr. Rex Archer's beard, who he's the director of the health department, and it said, "No soup for you." So people are really taking this and running with it.
Seinfeld reference, if you're not familiar, those out there on the No Soup for You, that is a Seinfeld reference.
Yes.
It's really interesting to me, and obviously, Kat, you didn't mean this. God forbid something happened to the people that are eating the soup. That we're not suggesting that anyone wants them to get sick or anything like that to get this message across. But it does strike me that the differences of opinion here, because what seems to be on their side, both what they're saying and what their supporters are saying, is there's got to be some allowance there for helping people without having to have permits and that kind of thing. What is wrong with me just as a person going out and making some soup and handing it out to people versus people like the mayor saying the rules are there to keep people safe. The rules are there because they're rules. We're trying to help everyone keep safe. It doesn't seem like a popular opinion, but not one that's too hard to understand if you listen to what the mayor is trying to say. It's not outlandish what the city is trying to suggest. Hey, we're all for helping people, but we're trying to make sure they're helped and not hurt in the long run. Is that a fair way to describe what the city's saying?
Oh, yeah, absolutely, which is not unfair at all. The point of contention here is that Free Hot Soup kind of argues they're not an organization. They're not a nonprofit. It literally is a Facebook page where people like plan to make food and go out and share it. And so their argument is that first, they don't have access to a commercial kitchen. I guess some people have offered commercial kitchens, but they feel like cooking things in a commercial kitchen is just defeats the purpose of free hot soup, which is this community where people are like cooking for their families and sharing what they would share with their families with people. So another thing that's kind of interesting, there was a state court of appeals case where a judge ruled on behalf of another group like Free Hot Soup and said that they were protected under the First Amendment, and that food sharing is like a form of a couple of things. It can be, freedom of speech, freedom of expression, rather, and also freedom of religion.
That's an interesting way to think, because I know that's something a lot of people have talked about, because it is almost not that this organization is faith-based or not, but that's something that a lot of faiths and a lot of religions do include, as far as helping the hungry, feed the poor, feed the homeless, feed the sick, that kind of thing. What is to stop someone from, just out of the goodness of their heart or out of the call of their own faith, to go out and help someone in this particular physical way? And that freedom of religion is something that I've seen as well, and it brings up an interesting conversation, I think, on this next topic. So they've seemed to be kind of defiant, I think, is a fair way to put how they've reacted to the health department. Now that they've done this a couple of times, and the health department has reacted now with this statement, what's next? Are they going to keep doing this? What's next for this particular fight?
They are going to keep doing it, and I think we can expect to see potential court summons for the people. I don't think the health department is just going to drop this. I think, everyone's kind of said, this is how I feel, and this past weekend was a holiday weekend, Veterans Day, but I don't know. I think that this coming weekend we might see health department folks back out there, and the Free Hot Soup people, if they're handing out the homemade foods instead of prepackaged stuff, I think that some court summons are going to be floating around.
Is this arrestable? Can they be arrested for doing this?
I don't think that you can be arrested because it's a city code
ordinance kind of thing. It's okay.
Yeah, with the health department.
Okay.
But you would be issued. It's kind of like if someone is illegally dumping.
Yeah, you can be
like
cited for it.
Summons.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Well, it'll be interesting to watch. And you mentioned the holiday that we just passed. Obviously, we're coming into the holiday season now, the midst of what's going to be potentially a long, cold winter across Kansas City, if we're already getting inches of snow the week before Thanksgiving. So it'll be interesting to see what's moving forward and what we see with this case. Kat, thanks so much for joining us today with your insight.
Oh, well, thank you. And before I let you go, I do want to point out one small regional thing.
Please.
That is not related at all to Free Hot Soup. People from the South pronounce it Thanksgiving, and people from the Midwest pronounce it Thanksgiving. And I just caught that in your
wait, say that again. I didn't catch it.
I say Thanksgiving.
Thanksgiving
instead of Thanksgiving.
Okay, so
which is so like.
So you're just emphasizing it differently.
Exactly.
Okay, so
it's the same thing with umbrella. I feel like people from the South say umbrella.
Umbrella. Mm-hmm. So I'm
not so much. But
I'm putting the emphasis on the wrong syllable, is what you're telling me.
No, not necessarily the wrong one. It's just a regional difference.
Okay. Well, if I don't see you before then, Kat, happy Thanksgiving to you.
Thank you. Happy Thanksgiving
to
you.
Look at that. We are reaching across aisles there and across regions.
I feel like there's some heterosexual normative conversations going on here. But yeah.
Kat Reed joining us. Kat, thanks so much. And thank you for joining us for 41 Action News 41 Files. Thanks to Todd Palmer, who was here. Thanks to Sarah Plake, who joined us as well. We will plan to have a podcast before Thanksgiving.
We'll be back next week. Yep.
Back before the holiday next week. I may not be here, but we're planning to have another issue, 41 Files, out next week. So please tell all your friends. Continue to download our podcast. Thanks so much for hanging out with us. And if I don't see you before then, happy Thanksgiving to you.
Thanks, Kat.
Thanks. Bye.